Appalachia's hills are full of ghost towns, but what's truly terrifying are the towns that look alive, until you realize everyone inside is already dead. Tonight, Dread Scribe writes again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. And if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. When I first arrived in the small Appalachian town of Black Hollow, it felt like stepping into a painting left out in the rain. The mountains rose like dark sleeping giants, their peaks crowned with mist that clung stubbornly to the treetops. I had come here to escape the chaos of city life, to find some semblance of peace after a year that had nearly broken me. The cabin I rented was old but sturdy, tucked deep into the woods where only the distant hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves kept me company. For the first few nights I slept deeply, lulled by the kind of silence you can't find anywhere else. But then on the seventh night I heard it, a long piercing whistle at exactly 3:07 a.m., slicing through the stillness like a scalpel through flesh. At first I told myself it was a train far away, or maybe some night owl whistling a tune, but there were no tracks nearby and no houses for miles. The sound didn't feel distant. It felt near, winding through the fog like a hunting call. The next morning, I asked a local shopkeeper about it while picking up coffee and supplies. Her face drained of color as if I'd spoken a forbidden word. She told me, in a trembling voice, never to follow the whistle. It's like a predator, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. It wants you to come closer. Folks who go looking for it don't come back the same, if they come back at all. Her words clung to me like cobwebs as I walked back to my cabin. For the next week, the whistle came every night at exactly 3:07 a.m., never a second earlier, never later. It was mechanical in its precision, almost ritualistic, and that scared me more than randomness ever could. Sometimes it seemed to come from deep in the woods, other times right outside my window. No matter how tightly I pressed my pillow over my head, the sound slid through, sharp and invasive, like it was bypassing my ears and going straight into my bones. I started to dread sleep, lying awake in a feverish haze as the whistle grew louder, clearer, almost purposeful. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. By the 12th night, my fear began to blur into obsession. I needed to know what was making that sound. I told myself it was just some kid playing a prank, or maybe an animal. Logic became my lifeline, even as a part of me knew better. That night, when the clock struck 3:07, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the fog-drenched woods. The air was cold, biting at my skin, and the mist curled around the trees like pale skeletal fingers reaching for me. The whistle was louder now, pulling me deeper, its tone oddly melodic yet eerily hollow. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon an old abandoned coal mine. Its entrance gaped like a black open mouth. The whistle was coming from inside, echoing against the stone walls in a way that made it impossible to tell how deep it went. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, shining my light into the darkness. There was nothing there, no people, no animals, just icy, unmoving air that seemed too cold for the season. Then the whistle stopped. For a moment, there was only silence, so heavy it felt alive. I turned to leave, my breath fogging in front of me. But just as I reached the tree line, the whistle began again, this time behind me. I spun toward the mouth of the mine and felt the whistle slide along my spine like a cold coin. The flashlight jittered in my hand, the beam skipping over timber ribs and bolts, and the note split into a braid of harmonics threading stone. I didn't just hear it. I tasted metal, a fleck on tongue tang, as if the air were bleeding. I remembered papers about infrasound making animals bolt, how vibration can shake the gut like thunder under skin. This wasn't below hearing. It was a needle pushed through it, precise as a surgeon's stitch. Terror has gravity. I stepped inside because turning away felt like stepping off a cliff, and forward at least offered a rope. The corridor swallowed. My footsteps. Damp walls breathed cool along my cheeks. When the whistle swelled, dust lifted in rings from the floor, a halo around my boots. My breath didn't rise, it leaned toward the dark. Then I understood the sound wasn't merely traveling. The mind was forming a throat around a voice that needed no lungs. I thought about why I'd come. The city noise I mistook for company, sirens stitching themselves into my sleep. I had wanted absence, of alarms, of questions, of the version of me that kept breaking promises. My father taught me to whistle, patient in a way he rarely was, and the day I caught the note, he grinned bright. Memory opened like a cellar door. I pursed my lips and offered a reply, a thin line of breath into the cave's throat. The mountain answered, not louder but closer. But what it asked of me, I couldn't yet name. The tunnel widened into a collapsed chamber, a circle where the roof had fallen to a coin of bruised sky. Helmets slept in the dirt like fossil eggs. I traced a name cut into a beam, M. Calhoun, and felt the grooves answer my fingers. The whistle paused. In the quiet, I heard grit settling, avalanches. Then the note returned from everywhere at once, a standing wave blooming. It struck my stomach like a bell, and from the floor rose a ribbon of fog, shivering as if plucked. Fog threaded down through the opening, strands of cotton vibrating to the pitch. They braided into shapes that held for a heartbeat, rings, a starburst, the suggestion of a hand, and then unraveled like water under wind. I'd watched cymatics once, sand convening into geometry. The geometry breathed. The star above the rails wasn't a star, it was a root, a lattice humming, arrowing toward a black seam in the wall. I moved after it because some invitations, our debts, and some maps are drawn in air. The fissure opened onto a ledge above a black glass still pool. My light skimmed the surface and returned an inverted chamber, a negative where the fog hand became form. A tall figure stood beside my reflection, shoulders squared like mine before bad news. It raised 2 fingers to its mouth, a gesture I knew by blood. No sound arrived. The pool rippled anyway, circles widening, counting backward. The whistle behind me softened, coaxing instead of cutting, and something beneath the water answered with a breath I felt in my ribs. I leaned closer, and the figure leaned closer too, as if about to teach me the note my father never could. The trail was supposed to be empty. That's what drew me to it in the first place. A narrow path through the Appalachian wilderness, where the air smelled of wet pine and iron-rich soil, and where even my thoughts seemed to quiet beneath the towering hemlocks. I was 3 miles in, the world reduced to the rhythmic crunch of my boots and the steady hum of cicadas when I felt it, that unmistakable prickling at the base of the neck, the body's ancient alarm. I froze. My breath caught mid-chest. When I turned, I saw it. No, him, standing on the ridge above me. The figure was wrong in a way that was hard to name. At first I thought it was a hunter, but there was no blaze orange, no gear, no movement. Just a pale face stretched tight like a mask that had dried and cracked in the sun, and those eyes, hollow pits that seemed to drink the light instead of reflect it. He didn't wave, didn't even flinch. He only stood there, silent and statuesque, like a scarecrow stitched from nightmares. For a moment, the fog curled around his shape, making him seem less human and more like a fragment of the hill itself. Then, without ever seeing him move, he was gone. I stumbled back to town, lungs aching, mind racing to rationalize what I'd seen. At the general store, I asked a group of locals gathered near the wood stove about the ridge. Their laughter cut off like a string snapped mid-song. One old man's hands trembled as he set down his coffee cup. "Nobody goes near Hollow Hill," he said, his voice little more than a breath. "Folks who do, don't come back the same. Some don't come back at all." Another woman crossed herself and muttered something about watchers and the old ways. They wouldn't say more, no matter how I pressed, their eyes sliding away from mine like shutters against a storm. By morning, my fear had curdled into defiance. I've never been good at being told where not to go. Maybe it was pride, maybe stubbornness, maybe the gnawing itch of curiosity that no warning could soothe. I returned to the trail with a backpack, a headlamp, and a reckless determination to see Hollow Hill in daylight. The sun was high when I reached the clearing near the base of the ridge, but the air there felt different, denser, as if the hill were holding its breath. I found strange carvings etched into tree trunks, spirals, and jagged runes that looked older than the bark itself. At the center of a bare patch of earth lay animal bones, arranged with obsessive precision into spirals that gleamed like white teeth in the dirt. As dusk bled into night, the forest changed. The cicadas went silent all at once, leaving a vacuum of sound that roared in my ears. Shadows thickened, pooling at the base of trees like spilled ink. I lifted my headlamp, scanning the ridge above me. My breath snagged in my throat. The figure was back, closer this time, its hollow eyes locked on mine. And then, from the corner of my vision, I saw another form emerge from the darkness. There were two of them now, standing perfectly still, and I realized too late that I had walked into their waiting circle. I refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Two figures, both identical in their dreadful stillness, their faces stretched pale and unnatural, like wet parchment pulled taut over bone. They didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. The mist pooled around their legs, giving the illusion they were hovering just above the earth. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body betrayed me. My muscles locked, frozen as if some unseen hand had plucked the strings that controlled me. Fear isn't always loud and frantic. Sometimes it's a suffocating silence that swallows thought whole, leaving only the primal rhythm of a pounding heart. The nearest figure tilted its head slightly, the movement so smooth and mechanical it was almost serpentine. I felt a rush of cold air brush my face, though there was no wind. Somewhere in the distance, an owl gave a single mournful cry, and then even that sound was gone. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. I forced myself to look away from their hollow eyes and down to the spirals of bones at my feet. They weren't random. They formed a pattern, a map, or maybe a trap, spiraling inward toward the very spot where I stood. A horrifying realization took root. I wasn't just trespassing here. I was exactly where they wanted me to be. I staggered backward, desperate to break free of the circle. The moment my boot broke the outermost ring of bones, a low, vibrating hum filled the air. Like the droning of a massive insect beneath the soil, the figures began to move, not with steps, but with a strange, gliding momentum, as if the earth itself were carrying them closer. My flashlight flickered, then died, plunging me into near-total darkness, save for a thin line of moonlight filtering through the trees. My breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale visible in the sudden chill. Memories surfaced, unbidden and cruel. The townsfolk's warnings, the way their voices had faltered when they spoke of Hollow Hill, their refusal to say what exactly waited here. They hadn't been protecting a secret. They'd been protecting me. That knowledge ignited something deep inside, a raw will to survive. I turned and ran, branches whipping against my face, tearing at my clothes. Behind me, the hum grew louder, almost deafening, interlaced with a whisper I couldn't understand. It wasn't English. It wasn't human. The trees seemed to conspire against me, twisting and rearranging in the darkness. No matter how far I ran, the ridge loomed just ahead, like a predator pacing its prey. My lungs burned, my legs threatened to collapse, but I didn't dare stop. When I finally broke through the tree line into the clearing, the moonlight revealed something that nearly stopped my heart. Dozens of spirals etched into the earth, stretching out like a vast web. At the center stood the two figures, and now there were four, their heads turned in unison, hollow eyes gleaming like black mirrors. The hum rose to a fever pitch, rattling my teeth, shaking the very ground beneath me. I fell to my knees, clutching my ears, but the sound wasn't outside anymore. It was inside me, echoing through bone and blood. My vision blurred, the forest melting into a whirl of shadow and light. And then, just before darkness claimed me, I understood the final, terrible truth. These weren't watchers at all. They were mirrors. The last thing I saw was my own face staring back at me, hollow-eyed and unblinking, as a fifth figure stepped silently into the circle. The road home that night felt endless, a dark vein running through the sleeping mountains. My headlights carved two narrow tunnels of light through the mist, illuminating patches of cracked asphalt and the occasional glint of broken glass. It was well past midnight, and I hadn't seen another car for miles. The silence inside my vehicle was so complete that the hum of the engine seemed unnaturally loud, like a heartbeat in my ears. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter, my fingers aching from the cold when I saw something ahead. No, someone. A faint orange glow bobbed in the distance, swaying back and forth like a fragile heartbeat barely clinging to life. At first, I thought it was just a lost hiker, or maybe a farmer heading home late. But as my car crept closer, the light resolved into the shape of an old-fashioned lantern, held aloft by a man standing in the middle of the road. His posture was strange, rigid, as if his limbs were being moved by invisible strings. He waved the lantern slowly, a beckoning motion that sent chills down my spine. The mist seemed to gather around him, curling like smoke from an extinguished fire. Something deep inside me screamed to keep driving, to floor the gas and not look back, but instinct, or maybe guilt, forced me to stop. I rolled down my window, calling out, my voice barely carrying over the steady rasp of my idling engine. The man didn't respond. He simply stood there, the lantern swaying, its glow flickering weakly. Against my better judgment, I stepped out of the car. The air hit me like a wall, damp and icy, and smelled faintly of coal and rust. My boots crunched on gravel as I approached, and the closer I got, the more wrong he seemed. His clothes were tattered, blackened as if scorched, and his head hung low, obscuring his face beneath the brim of a battered miner's helmet. "Are you hurt?" I asked, but even as the words left my mouth, a part of me knew he wasn't alive. The realization hit like a sharp inhale of cold water. The lantern flickered once, twice, then went out completely. In that same breath of darkness, the man was gone. My flashlight beam darted wildly, cutting through fog and empty space, but there was nothing. Only the faint echo of my own breathing and the vast, oppressive silence of the mountain road. Shaken, I bolted back to my car and drove faster than I should have, the tires spitting gravel as I fled the scene. My pulse didn't slow until I saw the dim glow of the town's single streetlight. I went straight to the sheriff's office, still trembling as I recounted what I'd seen. His weathered face remained unreadable until I mentioned the lantern. Then a shadow passed over his eyes. He told me reluctantly of an old legend. A miner named Samuel Briggs who had died decades ago in a mine collapse, guiding trapped men toward safety with only his lantern. They said his spirit now wandered the back roads, doomed to seek help he would never find. I tried to laugh it off, but later that night as I sat alone in my living room, I saw it through the window. The same flickering glow, bobbing gently like a heartbeat in the dark. A voice, impossibly close, whispered my name. I froze, my breath catching like a snared bird. The glow outside my window pulsed softly, too deliberate to be a reflection, too warm to be anything but firelight. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat matching the slow sway of that lantern. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't even think. Then the whisper came again. My name, drawn out like a sigh through clenched teeth. It wasn't loud, but it slid into my ears with a precision that felt invasive, as if the sound had been made inside my own skull. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, my eyes never leaving the window. The glass was fogging from the cold outside, and for a split second I saw a pale hand press against it from the other side. I bolted for the door, but when I flung it open, the yard was empty. The mist had thickened, swallowing the world in a white shroud. I could barely see the porch steps, let alone the road beyond. My breath rose in frantic clouds as I called out, demanding to know who was there. No answer came, only the faint creak of metal like an old lantern's handle being twisted. It was close, too close. I retreated back inside and locked the door, my mind racing. The sheriff's story about Samuel Briggs wasn't just a legend. It was a warning. Sleep was impossible. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the dark window, every nerve strung tight. My phone had no signal, the landline dead. Time stretched, syrupy and disjointed. Around 3 a.m., the whispering began again, softer this time, like a lullaby meant to draw me in. It wasn't just my name anymore. It spoke of tunnels collapsing, men screaming in the dark, the desperate pounding of fists against rock. The words painted images in my mind so vivid I could almost taste the choking dust. My lungs tightened, and for a moment I felt as though I were buried alive. The glow appeared again, this time inside the house. It spilled faintly from the hallway, flickering along the baseboards like the tongue of a hungry flame. My body went cold. I crept forward, every floorboard groaning under my weight. The light bobbed steadily, moving away as if luring me deeper. My rational mind screamed to run, but another part of me, a strange, resigned curiosity, pushed me onward. At the end of the hall, the light paused. When I turned the corner, I saw him. Samuel Briggs stood in my living room, or what was left of him. His body was fractured and blackened, like a statue that had been burned and cracked. His face was hidden beneath the brim of his old miner's helmet, but I could see his mouth moving, forming words I couldn't understand. The lantern dangled from his hand, its flame trembling. Slowly, he lifted his head, and in that moment, I realized he had no eyes, only deep cavernous sockets that seemed to stretch forever, like tunnels into the earth itself. The whisper surged into a deafening roar inside my skull. The lantern light flared, blinding me. When my vision cleared, the room was empty, but the lantern remained, resting on the floor, its flame still burning. And then I heard it, the creak of my front door opening. The lantern's glow began to rise again. It looked like something ripped from an old photograph. Sepia-toned wood, a sagging porch, and windows clouded with age. My great-grandmother's will had named me its sole inheritor, though I'd never known she owned a place this deep in the Appalachian woods. The dirt road that led there wound like a vein through the trees, narrowing until branches scraped against the roof of my car like brittle fingernails. By the time I reached the clearing, dusk had fallen, painting the sky in bruised purples and smudged grays. The cabin stood at the center, perfectly still, like a creature holding its breath. From the first moment I stepped inside, I felt wrong. Not afraid exactly, just observed, as though the air itself had eyes. The interior smelled of cedar and something older, sourer, like damp soil buried beneath the floorboards. Dust motes drifted lazily in the stale light, but the house didn't feel abandoned. It felt expectant. My boots creaked against the warped floorboards as I explored. That's when I noticed the markings, symbols etched into the walls beneath peeling wallpaper, faint but deliberate. Some resembled spirals, others jagged, interlocking shapes that seemed to shift when I looked away, like puzzle pieces rearranging themselves in secret. I tried the doors, wanting to map the place in my head, but every time I opened one, the room beyond wasn't quite the same. A chair that had been against the wall was now in the center of the room. A window that once faced west now opened to a view of the forest behind me. At first I blamed exhaustion and the dying light, but unease burrowed deep, gnawing. I left sticky notes on the walls to track where I'd been. They vanished when I turned my back. Night fell like a shutter slamming closed. The woods outside disappeared into a black void, leaving me with the flickering light of an old oil lamp I'd found in the kitchen. Its flame cast strange, writhing shadows, distorting the symbols until they seemed to crawl across the walls. Somewhere deep in the cabin, a door slammed, though no wind blew. I froze, straining to listen, but the house was suddenly silent. Too silent, as though even the insects outside had been muted. I found my great-grandmother's journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard in what passed for a study. Its leather cover was cracked, pages yellowed and brittle. Her handwriting looped and tangled, frantic by the end. She wrote of what came before, of an ancient hunger older than the forest itself, and of how the cabin wasn't just a home but a cage, a trap built to contain it. If the walls break, it will break free, one entry warned. Another was nothing. But the same phrase repeated over and over. The house must wait. The house must wait. I tried to leave then, panic clawing at my chest, but the front door no longer opened to the porch. Instead, it revealed a hallway I'd never seen before, impossibly long, folding into sharp angles like origami. The cabin groaned, a deep guttural sound, as though it were breathing. My lamp sputtered, throwing frantic bursts of light. Behind me, in the darkness, a whisper bloomed, cold and intimate. Finally, it breathed. You're home. I spun around, my breath tearing from my throat, but no one stood there. Only the dark, rippling hallway stretching away like a vein beneath skin. The whisper seemed to linger, coiling around my ears. The air felt thick, almost liquid, pressing in on me with the weight of an unseen tide. My hands trembled as I clutched the oil lamp tighter, its meager glow trembling like a frightened heartbeat. Somewhere deep in the house, boards creaked in a slow, deliberate rhythm, like footsteps, pacing in another room, but this time, they were closer. I moved forward, not because I wanted to, but because the hallway seemed to pull me. The floor slanted subtly under my feet, like a tongue guiding prey toward a throat. The walls were no longer just wood. They pulsed faintly, as though something alive pressed against them from the other side. Symbols bled through the wallpaper, glowing faintly in colors I couldn't name. I passed door after door, each one opening briefly to reveal impossible spaces. A field of black water stretching beneath a starless sky. A room filled entirely with mirrors, reflecting not me, but someone watching me. Each glimpse was a threat, disguised as a choice, and every door slammed shut the moment I looked away. My great-grandmother's words looped in my mind. The house must wait. She hadn't been warning others. She had been warning me. The cabin wasn't a home passed down through bloodlines. It was a prison, its key inherited like a curse. And now, with her gone, it had chosen a new keeper. My pulse thundered as I realized why the house felt alive. It wasn't just holding something, it was feeding it. And the longer I stayed, the more it fed on me. I turned a corner and stumbled into a vast chamber that shouldn't have fit inside the cabin's modest frame. The ceiling arched impossibly high, beams twisting like the ribs of a giant creature. In the center stood a structure, made of doors stacked in a spiral, each one etched with the same symbols I'd seen on the walls. They seemed to breathe, inhaling and exhaling in unison, and the sound was eerily similar to my own ragged breathing. As I stepped closer, the doors began to open one by one, revealing glimpses of my past, my childhood bedroom, the hospital room, where my mother had died, even the cramped apartment I'd left behind. Each memory was distorted, warped at the edges like melting film. A shape moved in the periphery, gliding rather than walking. I caught flashes of it between the doors, a figure made of shadow and bone, faceless yet horribly familiar. It whispered, in a voice that was not one voice but many layered together. "You've come home," it said, and the words vibrated through the floor, through my bones. The truth slammed into me. This thing wasn't trapped in the house. It was the house. I bolted toward what I thought was an exit, but the walls folded, twisting like paper in a cruel hand. Every turn led me deeper, not out. My lamp flickered wildly, then died, plunging me into absolute darkness. In the pitch black, I felt hot breath against my ear, and the whisper came again, soft and triumphant. "Now you will wait too. There's a stretch of Route 19 that locals call the Vanishing Mile. It cuts through a lonely patch of forest just outside our town, a 2-lane ribbon of asphalt that seems ordinary during the day but swallows people whole at night. I'd heard the stories my entire childhood, whispers at gas stations, rumors traded over cheap beer at the diner. Folks said if you drove it after midnight, you'd come out the other side missing hours you couldn't account for, like a chunk of your life had been stolen. Some claimed they'd woken up parked on the shoulder, their engines cold, their clocks 3, sometimes 4 hours ahead. Others swore they'd seen a mile marker numbered 13, one that doesn't appear on any map. And then, nothing. I'd never believed in ghost stories. I'm a rational person, grounded in facts and figures, the kind of guy who checks his smoke detectors twice a year and pays his bills early. But curiosity is a kind of hunger, and once you hear a mystery often enough, it starts gnawing at you. So, one cold, misty night, I decided to test it for myself. Armed with a full tank of gas and my phone's camera set to record, I drove out to that infamous stretch just as the clock on my dashboard ticked past 12:30 a.m. The road felt different the moment my tires touched it, like crossing an invisible threshold. My headlights barely seemed to reach the pavement, as though the darkness itself was swallowing the light. The trees on either side were dense, their branches clawing at the sky like the fingers of drowned men. I set my cruise control at exactly 45 miles per hour and kept my eyes locked ahead, determined to notice everything. My phone's screen glowed beside me, the recording light blinking like a tiny red heartbeat. For several minutes, nothing happened. Just the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires. Then I glanced at the dashboard clock and froze. It had jumped forward 3 hours. My stomach flipped as if I'd crested a sudden drop. The gas gauge, which had been full, now hovered near empty. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I slammed the brakes, the car fishtailing slightly on the damp road, and when I came to a stop, there was nothing but silent forest around me. No other vehicles, no wind, not even the usual nighttime insects. The world felt paused. Shaking, I turned the car around and drove home as fast as I dared, my mind scrambling for explanations. A glitch, a mechanical failure, anything but the truth I was starting to suspect. When I pulled into my driveway, I checked the phone footage. My stomach turned cold. The video showed me driving calmly for hours, but outside the windows, the same quarter-mile of road played on repeat like a broken film reel. I couldn't leave it alone. The next night I went back, this time with a tripod set up on the roadside. Midnight came and went. My camera caught everything. Too much, maybe, because at 3:07 a.m., 2 headlights appeared in the distance, bright and steady. My breath caught. They grew closer, perfectly aligned, like the unblinking eyes of some colossal creature. But there was no engine noise, no shape of a car behind the lights, just twin orbs cutting through the fog. My heart pounded as I reached for the camera to zoom in. And that's when I saw it, the impossible image that froze my blood. It wasn't a phantom car at all. It was my car, speeding toward me. And behind the wheel, illuminated in that pale, otherworldly glow, was me, staring back with wide, lifeless eyes. My own face stared at me through the windshield, pale and hollow, like a photograph drained of all color. The figure behind the wheel didn't blink, didn't even breathe. My knees buckled, and I nearly dropped. The camera. The headlights surged closer, bright enough to burn through the fog, until instinct screamed at me to dive off the road. Gravel tore at my palms as I rolled into the ditch. When I looked up, the car was gone. No taillights disappearing into the distance, no engine rumble fading into the night. Just an empty stretch of black asphalt stretching endlessly in both directions. My chest heaved with ragged breaths, the damp air cutting like knives down my throat. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the tripod. The camera's red recording light blinked steadily, oblivious to the nightmare I'd just seen. My hands trembled as I hit play. The screen showed me standing there alone. No headlights, no duplicate me. Just an eerie silence, like reality itself had erased what had happened. That should have been my cue to leave, to run back to my car and never look back. But something about the road felt magnetic, like it had sunk invisible hooks into my skin. I needed to know where that other version of me had gone. I turned my own car around and drove slowly, every nerve screaming, until the dashboard clock froze at exactly 3:13 a.m. The mile marker numbers blurred past, 10, 11, 12, then nothing. There was no 13, only an unnatural void where the air seemed heavier, thicker, like breathing through wet cloth. The forest around me shifted subtly. The trees seemed too close, their branches knitting together to form a tunnel. The blacktop glistened as though coated in oil, reflecting a pale light that had no source. I slowed to a crawl, my pulse syncing with the hum of the engine. In the rearview mirror, the road behind me wasn't there anymore, just swirling darkness, like ink dissolving in water. It was as though the world had folded in on itself, sealing me inside. Up ahead, a glow shimmered through the fog. My stomach dropped. The twin headlights returned, hovering at the far edge of visibility. They didn't approach this time. They waited, patient and unblinking. My fingers dug into the steering wheel, sweat slicking my palms. I thought of the stories, of the people who'd vanished for hours and come back broken, unable to explain what they'd seen. Maybe they hadn't been lying. Maybe they'd met their own ghosts on this stretch of impossible road. I pressed the accelerator, desperate to break through. As the lights loomed closer, I braced myself for impact. At the last second, the headlights veered and passed beside me. My heart stopped when I saw it clearly. My car, pristine and whole, gliding soundlessly past. And there, in the driver's seat, was me. But this version of me turned its head, meeting my gaze with a twisted, knowing smile. My tires screeched as I swerved to avoid the ditch. When I looked back, both the car and the other me had vanished. The road ahead was normal again, dawn's first light bleeding through the trees. My clock read 7 a.m., though I'd only been gone minutes. Back home, I checked the footage one final time. What I saw made my stomach lurch. Frame by frame, I watched as my duplicate leaned close to the camera, staring directly into the lens. Then, with a whisper I could barely hear, it mouthed a single word: stay. The hollow had always felt different, even in daylight. It was a shallow dip in the hills, ringed by gnarled trees that seemed to lean inward, as if conspiring. When the fog rolled in, it pooled there like milk in a cracked bowl, dense and impenetrable. Growing up, I'd heard the stories that on certain nights, if you stood still and listened, you could hear voices rising from the mist. They called it the choir in the hollow, though no one who heard it ever stayed long enough to see its source. People said it was beautiful, too beautiful, like honey laced with poison. For years, I dismissed it as small-town folklore, one of those spooky tales told to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. But last week, I heard it for myself. I was walking home late, the moon a faint, silver coin behind heavy clouds, when the fog began to creep along the ground. At first it was subtle, a thin veil clinging to the roadside, but then it thickened, swallowing the trees and the path ahead. That's when I heard the first note. Soft, distant, and achingly pure. The melody rose like a thread of smoke, weaving through the fog. It wasn't just one voice, but many, harmonizing in a way that made my chest ache. It felt almost intimate, like someone humming in the next room. My pace slowed against my will. Each note seemed to hook into me, tugging gently, urging me to follow. Before I knew it, I'd left the path and was heading toward the hollow, the world around me dissolving into shifting gray. As I crested the ridge, the sound grew stronger. It wasn't just heard, it was felt, thrumming through my bones like a second heartbeat. I peered down into the hollow and froze. Figures stood in the mist below, a dozen or more, swaying in perfect unison. Their movements were slow and mechanical, like marionettes guided by invisible strings. Even from a distance, something was terribly wrong with their faces. It was as though someone had smeared them, blurring every feature into an indistinct shadow. The song swelled, wrapping around me like warm silk. My thoughts dulled, replaced by a blissful, terrifying calm. I wanted to go to them. I needed to go to them. Each step forward felt inevitable, like a dream where you're pulled toward something you can't escape. But just as my feet reached the edge of the hollow, a fragment of reason screamed through the haze. I clamped my hands over, my ears breaking the spell for a split second. The choir's song warped, rising in pitch, sharp and angry now. I turned and ran, stumbling blindly through the fog. Their melody chased me, threads of sound weaving into words I couldn't fully understand. Join us. Join the harmony. Become whole. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop until the first weak glow of dawn cut through the trees. Only then did the song fade, dissolving into the morning air like it had never existed. I collapsed in my driveway, shaking, convinced I'd escaped. But that night, as I sat alone in my living room, I heard it again. Soft, sweet, unmistakable. This time it wasn't coming from the hollow. It was coming from inside my house. At first I thought it was my imagination. Exhaustion can play tricks on the mind, twisting ordinary creaks and hums into phantom sounds. But as I held my breath and listened, the melody grew clearer, threading through the silence like a silver needle through cloth. It came from the walls themselves, faint but unmistakable. The same haunting harmony I'd heard in the hollow. My blood turned to ice. The choir hadn't been left behind in the mist. It had followed me home. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, but the screen flickered and died the moment I touched it, leaving only my distorted reflection staring back in the black glass. The melody swelled, filling the house until it seemed the very air was vibrating. It wasn't loud, but it was invasive, like a whisper pressed directly into the folds of my brain. Each note was a hook sinking deeper, pulling me toward the source. I moved from room to room, searching for the intruder, but the sound shifted each time I got close, always one step ahead, as if the house itself were breathing with the song. My own heartbeat synced with the rhythm against my will. When I passed the hallway mirror, my reflection lagged a second behind, its lips moving in perfect time with the melody. I stumbled back, choking on a scream. Then I saw it. The fog. Wisps of it curled under the door to the basement, pale tendrils that writhed like living things. Against every instinct, I descended the stairs. The basement was dark, damp, and cold. But the moment my foot hit the bottom step, the choir's song surged, echoing off the stone walls. Figures stood in the shadows, just as they had in the hollow, swaying in that same unnatural unison. Their blurred faces turned toward me, featureless yet full of unbearable intent. One of them extended a hand, long and thin, its outline rippling like smoke. A voice, not spoken, but inside my skull, whispered promises of peace, of belonging. Join us. Join the harmony. You will never be alone again. The longing that gripped me was almost worse than the fear. For a heartbeat, I wanted it. I wanted to dissolve into that endless, perfect song, to let my fractured mind be woven into something whole. But then I saw the truth. Behind the figures, on the far wall, dozens of shadowy forms writhed, trapped and screaming in silence. They weren't part of the choir. They were the choir, their voices stolen and twisted into a weapon. Rage and terror jolted me back to myself. I clamped my hands over my ears and bolted up the stairs, the melody clawing at my mind, tearing at my will. As I slammed the basement door shut, the song stopped abruptly. My house fell silent, eerily so, as if nothing had ever happened. My heart hammered as I backed away, desperate to believe it was over. Then, from behind me, a soft, perfect note floated through the air. It came from my own mouth, and when I rushed to the mirror, my reflection was still swaying. Long after I'd stopped, where the streetlights fade into darkness and weeds choke the cracked asphalt, sits the old mannequin factory. Its windows are blackened with grime, its rusted sign hanging by a single chain that clinks when the wind blows. Kids grow up telling stories about it. How, decades ago, workers disappeared without a trace. How screams were heard echoing from its hollow halls long after the factory closed. Most people laugh it off as urban legend. Most, but not all. My best friend Caleb didn't laugh. He was always chasing the thrill of proving himself, the first to accept a dare and the last to back down. 2 nights ago, he texted me a grainy photo, a cracked doorway, and the words, "Going in. Bet you won't follow." That was the last message I ever got from him. When his parents said he never came home, my stomach sank. I knew where he'd gone, and I knew no one else would dare to go after him. So, against every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I drove out there alone. The moment I stepped inside, the air shifted. It was colder than the night outside, thick with the smell of rust and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit left too long in the sun. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight, falling slowly, like snow in a place where time had stopped. My footsteps echoed across the vast empty floor, the sound bouncing back too fast, as if the walls were closer than they should have been. The mannequins were everywhere, rows upon rows of them, lined up like an audience frozen mid-breath. At first, I thought they were ordinary, faceless heads, stiff plastic limbs. But then my light caught their features, and my throat went dry. These mannequins had faces, real faces. Their expressions were twisted in terror, mouths open wide as if captured mid-scream. Their glassy eyes seemed to follow me as I moved, reflecting, my flashlight in tiny accusing points of light. I told myself they were just expertly crafted props, maybe remnants from the factory's glory days. But unease crawled up my spine like icy fingers. I kept moving, whispering Caleb's name. The further I went, the stranger the poses became. Some figures stood mid-run, their muscles straining as if they'd been fleeing. Others crouched, shielding their heads. One near the corner had its hand outstretched, reaching for something or someone. That's when I saw him. Caleb. His hoodie was unmistakable, the same one he'd worn the night he vanished. He stood at the center of the room, frozen like the others, his face contorted in silent terror. My knees nearly buckled. I stumbled toward him, calling his name, begging him to move, and then his fingers twitched. Relief surged through me, like fire. He was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. I reached for his hand, desperate to pull him free. But before I could touch him, the air behind me turned icy cold. A whisper slid against my ear, soft and deliberate, cutting through the silence like a blade. Don't move. Every muscle in my body locked at once. The voice was low and deliberate, so close it felt like it had been breathed directly into my ear. My skin prickled, cold sweat trickling down my spine. I wanted to spin around to see who or what was behind me, but something deep and primal screamed not to. The mannequins around me seemed to lean closer, their silent screams frozen mid-air, like a theater audience awaiting the next act of a nightmare. Caleb's fingers twitched again, this time more violently, like a trapped animal fighting invisible restraints. His glassy eyes rolled toward me, wide with desperation, silently begging me to help. My breath came in shallow gasps, and the whisper echoed once more, firmer now. If you move, it will see you. The temperature plummeted. My breath turned to fog, drifting upward into the darkness above. I risked a glance toward the ceiling and wished I hadn't. In the rafters, a shape hung upside down, its body long and impossibly thin, like stretched shadows stitched together. Its limbs twitched erratically, moving in sharp insect-like bursts. A head, or something like one, tilted toward me, and I realized it didn't have a face. Instead, it had a smooth surface, reflective like a dark mirror. The thing dropped from the ceiling without a sound. It slithered between the rows of mannequins, its movements impossibly fast, yet eerily graceful, like a predator playing with its prey. Everywhere it passed, the mannequins shifted slightly, their positions changing as though rearranged by unseen hands. I froze, forcing myself to stay as still as Caleb, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure it would give me away. It paused inches from my back. I could feel its presence, a suffocating weight pressing down on me. Slowly, a hand, cold and damp as ice, clamped onto my shoulder. My vision blurred at the edges, and I bit down hard to keep from screaming. The whisper came again, but this time it was inside my head, echoing like a chorus of voices layered atop one another. Do you know what they are? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The creature's grip tightened. One of the mannequins near us shifted, its jaw creaking open. A faint gurgling moan escaped its throat, a sound so human, so broken, it made bile rise in my throat. My mind snapped to a horrible truth. These weren't mannequins at all. They were people, trapped, preserved mid-terror. My stomach lurched as I understood what had happened to Caleb and what was about to happen to me. Had one chance. Caleb's eyes locked on mine, and somehow, through sheer will, I mouthed the word, "Run." Then, in a single motion, I twisted and shoved backward with all my strength. The creature hissed, a sound like tearing metal, and stumbled. I grabbed Caleb's arm and yanked. His body was stiff, unyielding at first, then suddenly gave way like ice cracking. Together we staggered toward the exit as the factory erupted in chaos. Mannequins toppling, limbs thrashing, the creature shrieking behind us. Just as we reached the doorway, a cold hand clamped onto my ankle. I turned, terror surging through me. Caleb screamed silently, pulling me with every ounce of strength he had. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I saw the creature's faceless head inches from mine. Then the light went out. When my grandmother died, her house fell silent in a way that felt unnatural, like the building itself had been holding its breath for years, and finally exhaled. She'd lived alone on the edge of the Appalachian woods, her closest neighbor miles away. Her life a series of eccentric rituals and whispered warnings we all dismissed as harmless superstition. I was the one tasked with clearing out her belongings, a job I thought would be sad but straightforward. It wasn't until I reached the basement that I realized how little any of us truly knew about her. The basement door groaned like an old throat clearing when I opened it. The air that rushed out was cold and metallic, carrying the faint smell of whetstone. I descended the steps slowly, my flashlight sweeping across shelves stacked with mason jars, bundles of dried herbs, and rusted tools whose shapes I didn't recognize. Against the far wall was a small locked door I'd never seen before. It was low and narrow, almost child-sized, with claw-like gouges around the frame as if something had tried to force its way out, or in. My pulse quickened as I crouched to examine it. Finding the key took hours of searching through drawers, sewing kits, and old tea tins. When I finally turned it in the lock, the sound was loud in the stillness, like a gunshot muffled by earth. The door swung open, and my breath caught. Inside was a room no bigger than a closet, its walls lined with shelves. On each shelf sat rows of glass jars, glowing faintly in the beam of my light. The creatures inside were like nothing I'd ever seen. Some looked vaguely insect-like, others had too many eyes, too many limbs. Their bodies were twisted and unnatural, as though sculpted by a child's nightmare. They floated in a viscous, amber-colored liquid, their tiny faces contorted in silent screams. The jars glimmered like captured stars, cold and otherworldly. On a small desk at the back of the room lay a stack of weathered journals. My grandmother's handwriting filled the pages, her neat loops unraveling into frantic scrawls as the entries progressed. The words chilled me more than the jars. She wrote of rituals to keep the mountain quiet, of things that lived beneath the soil, hungry and restless. She described sacrifices, offerings, to appease these creatures, to prevent them from rising. The last entry was a hurried warning. The final offering must be made before the blood moon. If not, the mountain will wake. I stumbled upstairs, the journals clutched to my chest, my mind reeling. The blood moon was tomorrow night. I tried to convince myself it was all madness, the delusions of an isolated old woman. But that evening, as I sat alone in the house, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of scratching beneath the floorboards. Soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I descended to the basement again, drawn by a dread I couldn't fight. The jars were gone, every single one. The shelves stood empty, the liquid pooled on the floor like spilled amber. And then, in the oppressive silence, something whispered my name from beneath the house. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. A trick of grief and exhaustion. But then it came again. clearer this time, dragging my name through the dark like a fingernail over wet glass. My knees locked and the beam of my flashlight wavered wildly across the basement walls. I wanted to run, but the sound rooted me in place, a dreadful magnet pulling at my bones. I backed toward the stairs, careful not to make a sound. The floor beneath me felt thin, as though something was pressing against it from below. In the corner, the gouges around the small door seemed deeper than before, raw wood splintering like exposed nerve endings. My grandmother's journals lay where I'd dropped them earlier, pages fluttering though there was no breeze. I grabbed the last volume, clutching it like a lifeline, and fled upstairs. In the kitchen, beneath the sickly yellow light, I forced myself to read. Her final entries were more disturbing than anything I'd imagined. She wrote of ancient things that slumbered beneath the mountain, creatures older than the forest itself. They didn't just feed on flesh. They fed on voices, on names spoken into the earth. The jars, she said, were not trophies but prisons, each one holding a fragment of their essence, a fragile barrier keeping the mountain silent. And now those barriers were gone. The blood moon rose while I read, staining the windows crimson. As its light spilled across the floor, the scratching returned, louder and more frantic. It wasn't just beneath the house now. It was inside the walls, above the ceiling, circling me. A low hum joined it, like 100 insect wings vibrating in unison. My breath came fast and shallow. The mountain wasn't just waking, it was hungry. I remembered her warning. The final offering must be made before the blood moon. But she hadn't said what that offering was. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of her notes, sketches of symbols, rituals described in trembling handwriting. One word appeared again and again: sacrifice. The floorboards buckled. A jagged claw punched through the wood, slick and glistening, leaving a trail of black ichor. I stumbled back as more claws followed, tearing the room apart. From the hole rose a sound that wasn't quite a roar, wasn't quite a scream, but something far worse. 1,000 voices wailing in perfect unison. Driven by instinct more than thought, I bolted for the basement. If the jars had been the prison, maybe the room itself was the key. My flashlight swung wildly, catching glimpses of movement in the shadows. Elongated limbs, too many joints, eyes like wet coals gleaming in the dark. I reached the shelves and saw a circle carved into the floor, its lines filled with dried, rust-colored stains. The whisper came again, right beside my ear now. "Join us." Something cold brushed my ankle. I looked down and saw a hand, human at first glance until it split into too many fingers. I screamed and kicked free, scrambling toward the circle. The journals tumbled from my arms, pages scattering like dying birds. As the creatures closed in, I realized the truth in a flash of terrible clarity. The final offering wasn't an object. It was me. And then, from beneath the earth came a chorus of voices chanting my name. The railway was supposed to be dead, like the mining towns it once connected. The tracks were warped and rusted, half swallowed by weeds, stretching across the Appalachian hills like the fossilized spine of some ancient creature. But on certain nights, when the fog rolled low and the wind stilled, people swore they heard a whistle cutting through the silence. Not the sharp, bright sound of a modern train, but something deeper, mournful, like a wound reopening. That's how the stories began, passed around in hushed voices. A phantom train that appeared without warning, carrying the souls of the lost. My Uncle James had been obsessed with those stories. He was a local historian with a taste for the supernatural, always chasing legends to their breaking point. When he disappeared 5 years ago, his truck was found near these same tracks. Everyone assumed he'd fallen victim to a wild animal or gotten lost in the hills. But late at night, my aunt swore she could hear a whistle far off in the distance, and her grief never let her stop believing he was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. I told myself I was doing this for her, but the truth was more selfish. I needed to know. So, on a cold October night, beneath a blood-tinged moon, I followed the tracks deep into the mountains. The fog clung to the rails like damp skin. My breath came in clouds, each exhale sounding louder than the forest itself. Midnight crept closer, and the world held its breath. Then I heard it, a low, echoing whistle that seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at once. The fog ahead glowed faintly, a ghostly light swelling in the darkness. My heart pounded as I stumbled back, but my feet rooted in place. Out of that glowing veil emerged a train, impossibly pristine. Its black metal gleamed like polished bone, wheels grinding silently on rusted rails. The headlamp's beam was cold and unnatural, slicing through the fog like a scalpel through flesh. When the doors opened, warm air rushed out, carrying the scent of coal smoke and something older, like earth that had never seen the sun. I should have run, but something about that warmth felt like a welcome. My uncle had vanished, chasing this train. If there were answers, they were inside. Swallowing my fear, I stepped aboard. The interior was beautiful, too beautiful. Velvet, seats, brass fixtures, soft yellow lights. But the passengers, they were wrong. Their faces were blurred, as if smeared by unseen hands, their features shifting like smoke in a breeze. They sat silently, staring ahead, lips moving in soundless conversation. When I brushed past one, the temperature dropped, and a whisper slid through my mind. Fragments of memories, fragments of death. At the center of the car, a familiar figure stood, my Uncle James. His face was clear, painfully clear, eyes wide, with fear and sorrow. "You shouldn't have come," he breathed, clutching my shoulders. Behind him, the passengers began to rise in unison, turning their shifting faces toward me. "Stay on the train," he pleaded, voice cracking. "If you leave, it will follow you." The whistle screamed, deafening, and the train lurched forward. I realized too late that I had nowhere left to run. The train surged forward with impossible speed, the windows blurring with streaks of white fog. My stomach dropped as if gravity itself had been torn away. I stumbled into a velvet seat, clutching the armrest as the lights flickered overhead. The passengers didn't react to the violent motion. They swayed in eerie harmony, their blurred faces tilted slightly upward as though listening to some silent hymn. A low hum filled the car, not from the engine but from them, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. My uncle grabbed my wrist, his grip cold and trembling. His eyes were wet, frantic. "You have to listen to me," he rasped. "They don't know they're dead. None of them do. This train keeps them moving so they never find out." His words hit me like a blow. I glanced around at the passengers, at their empty, shifting expressions, and felt bile rise in my throat. "James," I choked, barely recognizing my own voice. "Why are you here?" His face crumpled with guilt. I boarded to understand. I thought I could document the legend, but once you step on, you belong to it. His hand tightened on mine. "You don't have to stay. You still have a choice. Please, jump while you can." The whistle screamed again, and the lights dimmed. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows until it felt like the train was moving through solid cloud. For a moment, I saw shapes in the mist, faces, countless faces, screaming silently. The hum grew louder, the passengers now standing, reaching for me with hands that blurred into claws. The warmth I'd felt earlier curdled into suffocating heat, as if the train itself was a living thing drawing breath. I bolted down the narrow aisle, shoving past the rising figures. Their bodies didn't resist so much as bend, like smoke dispersing around my movements. My uncle's voice followed me, desperate and raw. "If you leave, it will follow you. It always follows." The final car door loomed ahead, and beyond it, the endless fog. My pulse thundered in my ears. I didn't think. I leapt. Cold air slammed into me, wrenching the breath from my lungs. I hit the ground hard, rolling through wet leaves and gravel. Behind me, the train screeched to a halt, its whistle cutting through the night like a wounded animal. When I looked back, the glowing cars were dissolving into the fog, the sound fading until only silence remained. I staggered home at dawn, my body bruised, my mind fractured. I told myself it was over, that I'd left the nightmare behind. But that night, as I sat in my darkened living room, a sound pierced the silence, the low, mournful wail of a whistle. I froze. Through my window, faint lights flickered between the trees, growing brighter with every heartbeat. Then, from the darkness of my hallway, a voice I knew too well broke the air. My uncle's voice. "You shouldn't have jumped," it whispered. The map by accident. Now the train buried beneath a pile of old newspapers in my grandfather's attic. The paper was brittle, yellowed with age, its edges curling like burned parchment. Most of the towns it showed were familiar, names I'd driven past my entire life. But near the center, tucked deep between two ridges of the Appalachian hills, was a place I'd never heard of, Darrow. No roads led to it anymore. No markings except for a faint circle and a date scribbled in the margin, 1912. When I asked my grandfather about it, his face went pale. "There's no town there," he insisted, voice sharp, final. But that night, when he thought I'd gone to bed, I overheard him muttering to himself, fragments of words like "they made us forget" and "better it stayed buried." That was enough to ignite my curiosity like dry tinder. I needed to see for myself. At dawn, I drove toward where the map said Darrow should be. The deeper I went, the stranger the world became. The GPS froze, spinning in endless loops, and the paved road dissolved into cracked dirt, then into nothing at all. Trees grew dense and unnaturally still, their branches heavy with mist. My cell signal died, leaving me completely alone. Then, through the fog, I saw it. A wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Darrow." Its paint faded but perfectly preserved, as if someone had just hung it there yesterday. The town was intact, too intact. Shops lined the main street, their windows glowing with warm light. Store shelves were stocked with bread, canned goods, and neatly folded clothes. A barber's pole spun lazily outside a small shop, though no wind stirred. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and smoke, like a holiday morning. But there were no people. Not a single soul. I walked down the street calling out, my voice swallowed by an unnatural hush. It felt less like a place abandoned and more like a stage set between performances, waiting for actors who would never arrive. My footsteps sounded intrusive, a trespass against whatever had been left behind. Inside the town hall, I found a small leather-bound diary lying on a desk. Its pages were written in hurried, uneven scrawl. The entries told a story that chilled me to the marrow. Decades ago, the townsfolk had discovered something beneath the earth, a darkness that whispered, promising power in exchange for worship. As the influence spread, they realized too late what they'd awakened. The only way to contain it was to erase themselves completely. Through rituals and blood oaths, they removed their names from history, their existence scrubbed clean so no one could ever follow their path and free what they'd imprisoned. The final entry ended mid-sentence. "If anyone finds this, leave before A." Creaking noise cut through the silence. I turned to the window and felt my stomach drop. The buildings at the far end of town were dissolving like sandcastles under a rising tide, crumbling into mist. As I stumbled outside, the bakery where I'd first walked in was gone. My own memories stuttered, pieces of my life slipping like torn pages scattered by the wind. My childhood home, my father's voice, my own name. I ran, but the fog chased me, erasing everything it touched. By the time I crossed the threshold of the wooden sign, the entire town had vanished. When I woke up in my bed the next morning, I thought it had been a nightmare, until I saw the map lying on my nightstand, and realized with dawning horror that no one I knew recognized me anymore. At first, I thought they were playing some cruel joke. My best friend looked at me like a stranger when I called her name. My boss said he didn't remember ever hiring me. Even my own grandfather, whose attic had hidden the cursed map, stared through me with vacant eyes, his voice polite but detached, like I was a door-to-door salesman who'd wandered in uninvited. My heart pounded as I asked him about the map, about Darrow. but he only shook his head and shut the door in my face. Panic surged through me. I rushed home, desperate for proof I still existed. My wallet was gone. My phone displayed only an empty contact list, no messages, no call history. Photographs on the walls had shifted, the faces of friends and family still smiling, but I was missing from every single frame, as though someone had carefully cut me out with a razor blade. My own reflection in the hallway mirror seemed faint, translucent, like smoke fading on cold glass. The realization hit like a landslide. Darrow hadn't just erased itself. It was erasing me. I tore open the map, smoothing its fragile edges across. My kitchen table, the inked circle where Darrow had been pulsed faintly, a heartbeat trapped beneath paper. Around it, faint lines spiderwebbed outward like veins, connecting to other towns, other places. My hands shook as I traced one line leading directly back to my own street. The ritual wasn't finished. Darrow's disappearance was spreading, its hunger bleeding outward to claim anything that had crossed its threshold. That included me. I couldn't sit still. I returned to the woods, retracing my steps to where the sign had stood. The fog was thicker this time, swallowing sound, muting even my own ragged breaths. Every step forward felt like walking through molasses, my memories unraveling with each crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots. By the time I reached the clearing, I could barely recall my own face. The sign was gone. The town was gone. Only the diary remained, resting on a moss-covered rock like a relic placed on an altar. Its pages were blank now, except for one chilling line scrawled across the center. To contain it, you must become it. The ground trembled beneath my feet. Shapes began to emerge from the fog, buildings half-formed, houses flickering like mirages. I saw ghostly outlines of people, their mouths open in silent screams, their bodies dissolving and reforming like sandcastles caught between tides. A pull gripped my chest, yanking me toward the center of town. My legs moved against my will, the mist clawing at my mind. I fought to remember anything, my name, my home, my grandfather's voice, but each memory slipped away like torn paper carried on the wind. When I reached the heart of the square, a final thought seared itself into my fading consciousness. If I let go completely, the ritual would complete itself. The darkness would be contained, but at the cost of my very existence. The mist swallowed me whole. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in bed again. Sunlight streamed through my window. For a fleeting moment, I thought I'd escaped. Then I checked. My phone, blank, my walls, bare. And outside, my neighbors walked past me without a flicker of recognition. Somewhere in the distance, a single wooden sign appeared where no road should be. Its paint gleamed fresh and wet. In bold letters, it read, "Welcome to Darrow. Subscribe, if you dare."